Good afternoon, good evening, good morning, good day, whenever you are coming to this lovely, wonderful practice. Hi, everyone. My name is Ashley. I am the owner, founder, curator, and clinician of Altruistic Ash. And today we are going through one of my favorite workshops that I'm super duper excited for, From the Head to the Heart, moving from understanding to feeling, which is a heart chakra shop. Okay. So just a little overview of how the flow is going to go today. I'll give you a little bit of information about myself. We'll go through some grounding guidance to engage in while watching this either live or on the replay. And then we're going to go through these 5 various parts. I know 5 seems like a lot, but I promise you that it is all work withable. It is all going to be great. So over the course of the next 60 to 75 minutes, we're going to get through each of these and we're going to get some really, really good information. So part 1, we're going to talk about what is emotional intelligence and why do we need it? Okay. We're going to talk about internal and external management of our emotions. We're going to then talk about how do we learn and start to identify our emotions if we are unfamiliar with that process. Then we're going to go into how do you process your emotions. So once you're able to identify them, how do you process them and work with them? And then lastly, we're going to talk about how do you actually feel your emotions. For certain folks, when it comes to emotions, there are things that we may experience or things that we feel like sometimes may happen to us or outside of us. But how do we actually feel into that emotion, tap into that emotion, and use that as information and energy? And then we'll kind of do a wrap up and a close, have some space for some questions, and then we'll get out of here for today. But first, hi. Hi there. My name is Ashley. I use they, she, and beloved pronouns. I am from altruisticash.co. I co-create safe healing spaces for Black and Brown folks to heal in community, and I'm fueled by my charge to help Black femmes achieve embodied authenticity by providing a safe space to transform their pain and hurt into their power and healing. I do this by offering one-to-one therapy and counseling, group programs, education, and community educational events and workshops, and aligned collaborations with organizations and folks. A little bit of grounding guidance. So first and foremost, as always, with any of the workshops that we have here, do what you need to do to take care of yourself first and foremost. That is why we have the replay. That is why we have space and time. Take what's for you and leave what's not. That's not something I put on here. If something really resonates with you and it feels really good, take it. If it's something that doesn't really sit well with you or isn't necessarily resonating, leave it. And that is totally okay. Feel free to engage in whatever way feels comfortable for you. That can mean taking yourself off on mute. That can mean taking time to chat things down in the chat box. I will be monitoring the chat box throughout our conversation as well to make sure that for folks that are engaging that way, that it's available. So part 1, what is emotional intelligence and why do we need it? I always like to start off our talks with a grounding question. So what comes to mind when you hear emotional intelligence? Feel free to drop anything in the chat, or you can take yourselves off of mute to respond. So for some folks, when it comes to emotional intelligence, oftentimes first responses are kind of like, oh, that's weird. Like when we think of intelligence as a framework or as a word, we think about book smart. We think about really being able to know things, learn things, understand things about certain people and places. But when you add the prefix or the word emotional before intelligence, people will kind of get a little bit stumped sometimes, and they're not really sure what that means. Some folks are dropping in the chat, reading the room, being able to understand and like interpret what's going on in a space. I think that's really, really important. And we'll get into social awareness and like really being able to see like what does it mean to be socially aware of folks? Self-reflection, absolutely. So being able to have that that relationship with your internal world, and empathy, absolutely. Really being able to empathize with with other folks and what they're going through in the world. So when it comes to emotional intelligence, or EI or EQ, sometimes as it's noted, is the ability to perceive, interpret, demonstrate, control, and use our emotions to communicate with and relate to others effectively and constructively. So emotional intelligence is kind of breaking up into these different categories, but it's our ability to have this relationship with our emotions, have this relationship with our internal knowing, and really being able to say, okay, now that I have this relationship and I have this information, how can I use it effectively to navigate the way in which I move through the world? Okay. IQ is how we think and how we process the world. And then EQ is how we perceive and feel throughout the world and through the world. Any thoughts around that definition before we move on?
Usually, when I hear about like emotional intelligence, I didn't associate with the idea of control and use your emotions. So the idea that you have to have some ability to regulate so that you can be able to talk through or perceive something correctly, so that if you're, empathizing or like reading the room, you know how to do that in a constructive but concise way that also intellectually probably leads to you getting to what your goal is. So I like how control is mentioned here, and I don't think I quite remember it being mentioned before. So that's really good that control is mentioned.
Absolutely. Because oftentimes when it comes to our emotions, we want to have control, right? Like I think a lot of people don't, what we often experience, or what can be a very common experience for folks, is that we feel like our emotions control us. Like we feel like we're kind of at the beck and the whim of whatever's going on, whatever
1000%.
wind blows, whatever way in which we are just kind of being moved and shaken and kind of sometimes dragged. Being honest, dragged through life. So I think it's really, really important to recognize that we have autonomy over our emotions, and it takes practice and it takes time, but it is possible for us to be able to work with the emotional states that we have and exhibit a level of control and self-control, particularly, and being able to feel, express, and mitigate what those emotions can be. Oh, shizzle. So why is emotional intelligence important? What is the point? Why are we here? Why are we even talking about this today? Emotional intelligence is one of those things that isn't necessarily like a buzzword in mainstream media or mainstream mental health at this point in time. But first and foremost, understanding our emotions and our feelings allows us the space to navigate through life without kind of, again, being dragged by our emotions. So having this relationship, having this experience of our own internal world and being able to tap into that in ways that feels effective and meaningful gives us the space to be able to say, okay, I don't have to spend time being anxious about what if somebody does something and then I just respond. I'm able to say, nope, I can have a level of self-control and I don't have to worry about that. And I can use that energy in that space to do something else, whatever else it is that I want. Secondly, we're able to show greater empathy for others when they're struggling. A challenging part of living in the world today is there is this decreased understanding, there's decreased just connection to our humanity and the things that make us all human. And it's really, really easy for folks who have differences to amplify those differences and downplay our similarities, which makes it challenging for us to have empathy for folks going through a myriad of different things. So, emotional intelligence allows us the space to be able to say, okay, I don't have to go through the same exact situation that you're going through, but I can have compassion for you because you are a human being. And as a human being going through whatever situation you are, it's incredibly tough. It's incredibly tough. Next, emotions can give us information about our internal world. It allows us the space to be able to identify our triggers or other opportunities or spaces for healing to be able to get dived, get dived, divin, dive deeper into it. Right. So emotional intelligence, again, I'm going to keep coming back to this idea of us having a relationship with our own internal world. What are the things that are going on in our heart? What are the things that are going on in our mind? What are the things that are going on that we may perceive that no one else in this world will ever have the chance or the opportunity to truly understand because they don't exist in this body in the ways in which we do? And emotional intelligence gives us that opportunity to really be able to examine, understand, and work with our internal world. Next, it helps us to better identify and connect with other people. Emotional intelligence, well, we'll get into it, but it talks about how we connect and relate to others and how we can manage our relationships and manage our social connections. Last, it also overall, emotional intelligence will help us improve our well-being. It allows us the space to be able to, again, live life not consumed by our emotions or consumed by our internal world. And ultimately, that helps us meet our own needs and live more authentically, which is the goal, right? We want to be able to exist in this world in a way that feels good, exist in this world in a way that is authentic and true to who we are on our inside. So when it comes to emotional intelligence and it comes to emotions and Black women, there's so much here. There's so much here. When we have the conversation historically about women, there is this concept that women are typically over emotional or they are just very emotional beings, which is oftentimes used as a way to invalidate our experiences or to downplay our concerns. And so sometimes as a result, some folks try and stuff down their emotions or stuff down their emotional expression in an effort to try and be deemed as more valid or adequate or equipped or stable in some certain cases, to decrease their ability of being invalidated by someone else, right? Black women often have their feelings and emotions weaponized against them. It is very, very frequent when we have conversations about the tropes of like the angry Black woman, right? And when we have a conversation on the angry Black woman, there's this expectation of women of being passive, right? And anytime there is a Black woman who is assertive, it is usually deemed too much for what any situation has called for. And as a result, this trope or this way or particularly viewing Black women's assertiveness leads to Black women being demonized, is leading to them being excluded, it's leading to them people accusing them of things or accusing them of emotional harm that oftentimes isn't true. Um, but because they're Black women, it's easier to kind of point and be like, oh, well, she was just being really mean or she was just being really nasty. And the truth is, no, she was communicating and setting a boundary. She was being assertive in her tone and she wasn't being flimsy. She wasn't being passive, which can be uncomfortable for some folks, right? Then on the another tail of the spectrum, we have Black women who are maybe deemed strong. And this challenge with the strong Black woman trope is that they can handle anything without seeming to break a sweat. So this idea of Black women doesn't allow her the space to experience any emotions, right? Because the goal is, it doesn't matter what's happening. It doesn't matter what life circumstances are bringing to you. You can handle it, and you got this, and you're not going to sweat, and you can handle anything, which again doesn't allow Black women the experience or the space to be able to say, like, yo, this is hard. I am struggling. I am sad. I am mad. I am frustrated. I am feeling down. I'm anxious. This idea of being a strong Black woman, which again, some folks, and I can speak for myself, like, it's something that we aspired to be, right? We wanted to be strong, like the people in our lives that we looked up to. But we realize now that only holding on to the strong Black woman as an identity marker really can prove to be detrimental to our ways in which we are able to express our emotions and exist in the full spectrum of who we are in our authenticity, right? Um, so yeah, any other thoughts around Black women or Black femmes and their emotions and how we relate to our emotional worlds, or the ways in which society impresses these tropes or these expectations on us?
I mean, everything that you said was 1000% spot on. In sexually and how it relates to my experience. And I think for me, it also goes back to family. Like, what are the tropes that family are covertly or overtly employing that speaks to or doesn't speak to how you can express your emotions
Mhm.
and what that looks like. I think, growing up, I'll just speak from my experience in predominantly Black household. To be angry or disappointed about something, you needed to fix your face because it was considered a level of disrespect to show disapproval. So as that goes on into my adulthood, being mindful of what my face says and being mindful about how I'm presenting when I'm frustrated or upset
Mhm.
has been something that I'm working through, because then I'm concerned about like how people are perceiving me, even though what I'm upset about may be a legitimate grievance. But I'm more concerned, or I struggle with, and sometimes being more concerned how the other person is perceiving me, so that there isn't a damage, either a break to the relationship and a consequence that I, want to avoid. So very all poignant points. It just helped me reflect back into not only society, but the family, my family dynamic.
And a lot of the first places in which we learn and understand our connections with our emotions and our emotional worlds comes from our family. And there is this wonderful, wonderful book called oh gosh, it's not the new Jim Crow. It is talking about the impact of slavery and the ways in which Black families had to socialize their children in an effort to keep them safe, and how some of those same sorry, an effort to keep the kiddos and their children safe, the behaviors and the tropes of how they raise their children in an effort to really to keep them alive, like literally to keep them alive. So this idea of children being seen and not heard, this idea of fixing your face, or stuffing down or masking your emotion or your pain or your frustration, to keep you safe. And one of the things that I remember growing up, my mother was in the military, and so her capacity for holding emotions just looked really, really different, from even from like the TV mothers that I saw, like Felicia Rashad, and like all the TV mothers that I saw, like they had the space for their kids' emotions and all these other things. And, my mom being as a part of the military, when I would get so upset and I would be crying and I would try and talk, like I kind of do, the stutter breath that most folks do when they're crying and they try to talk. And I explicitly remember my mom being like, okay, stop. She'd just be like, stop, 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 calm down. and then speak. And it taught me over time that, being able to cry about things is a barrier to being able to get your needs met. And so there was a period of time in my life where I was like, I'm not gonna cry, knowing darn well that I'm a crybaby, and that crying is a part of like my spiritual practice at this point. So I think it's really, really important to acknowledge and recognize that within our families, like, we learn a lot of these things. We look at our grandmothers, we look at folks who seemingly don't break a sweat, and we want to try and emulate that because that's what we see and that's what we know. But I encourage every person who sees this and who watches this to really be able to say, like, okay, this is maybe the tradition of how it's been done, but what works for me? What can I, again, like, taking the meat and leaving the bones, what do I want to keep? What can I integrate that is healing and helpful and medicinal for me? And what are the things that are harmful or keep me stagnant that I can put back down and, and let it go? Right. And I think one of the things that's just important to acknowledge for folks that identify as femmes is when it comes to emotions, when it comes to having this connection with this deep resonant connection with our internal world, having emotions is what makes us human. That's what makes us different from the trees. That's what makes us different from the squirrels and the birds and the flowers and, the water. Having emotions is a part of what gives us our humanity, and having this knowledge and access to this is a fundamental part of our humanity. So remembering that being able to have access to our emotions is a part of our superpower, and it's super, super important that we're able to continue to recognize and acknowledge that. All right. So we have four components when it comes to talking about emotional intelligence. We have two components that are internal, and we have two components that are relational or intra or interpersonal, right? So we have self-awareness, which includes emotional self-awareness and understanding ourselves. And I'll get into a bit more of a definition of each of these um, in just a moment. Then we have self-management, which is really being able to regulate and control yourself, managing how your healthy emotions, taking initiative, following through on commitments, and being able to adapt to changing circumstances. Then we have social awareness, which is really composed of empathy and organizational awareness and understanding how do people, places, things connect to, relate, and relate to one another. This is understanding how other people's emotions, needs, and concerns. How do you pick up on emotional cues? Do you feel comfortable socially? And in what situations or with what people do you feel comfortable and safe with? And then lastly, we have relationship management. So this is how do you develop and maintain good relationships, communicate clearly and assertively, and work well with others, and then manage conflict, which could be a whole nother workshop in and of itself. So I'm gonna take a sip of my tea here. Okay. Self-awareness. Self-awareness involves being able to read your own emotions and recognize their impact. It also involves knowing your strengths and limits and having a sense of self-confidence. It's about having the ability to both recognize and better understand your moods and your emotions, and about understanding what drives or fuels those moods and emotions, and how that connects to how we relate and connect with other people. And I'll give some more specific examples on another slide set after this. I just want to give some grounding definitions to each of these. Self-management competencies involve having a sense of achievement, right? So self-management is really about emotional self-control, adaptability, and being able to move with changing circumstances, being able to be resilient in the face of changes, chaos, challenges, whether expected or unexpected, and then maintaining some sort of a positive outlook or a hopeful or a faithful outlook on your life, right? Those who practice this competency usually have space and are more willing to accept responsibility for their emotions and learn how to choose their emotional responses over a period of time. Social awareness is competencies involve being able to sense other people's emotions and understanding their unique perspectives and learning to take an active interest in things that others are about. So, social awareness is all about how do I connect to other people? How am I relating to other people? What is going on? Having empathy. It also involves organizational awareness. And again, it's saying, okay, how does this connect to X, Y, and Z? So, for example, you're having a conversation with someone, you met someone at a networking event, you're having a conversation with them and you're kind of going about the regular things and just chatting and talking, and all of a sudden they bring up a particular sports team and you're like, oh wow, you're a fan of this sports team and you have some information or some knowledge, and you're like, I feel this particular way about this, or I feel like this. So having organizational or situational awareness in those social situations are being able to correctly match and point items of connection with other people together. Okay. And then lastly, we have relationship management. So relationship management competencies involve getting along well with others. How do we handle conflict? How do we clearly express ideas and use sensitivities to manage others' feelings, right? I like to remind folks that we we can't control how other people respond, but we can do our best within the tools and the skills that we have available to us to communicate in a way that can be better received by another person. For example, if you are setting a boundary with someone that you love, if you're yelling at them and being short with them and being snippy with them and telling them about the boundary, is it still communicating the boundary, which is the end goal? Yeah. Is it probably going to be received in the best way that it gets your needs met at the end of the day? Probably not. But if you are firm, if you are gentle, if you are kind and able still to be assertive in communicating that boundary with this other person, will they be more likely to hear and receive you? Yeah. Does this control how they're going to respond to the boundary? Not necessarily, but it gives your needs being met in that more moment more of an opportunity to be able to be met versus communicating in a way that is not necessarily a good match for others. So this domain is particularly about interpersonal dynamics. How well do you communicate and cultivate relationships? To be effective in this domain, this is the one that is kind of the modge podge of everything else. It really requires you to have a level of self-awareness, have a level of being able to have self-management or self-regulation, have a social awareness of everything that's going on, and you pull all three of those things together, and you're able to exhibit relationship management. Right? Any questions on these before we get into some more specifics of breaking each of these down? Cool. Let's hit it. So internal and external management of emotions. So as you kind of saw with the breakdown, we have two sets of skills and tools that are focused on the self. And then we have two sets of tools that are focused on the ways in which we interact and engage with others. So with self-awareness is combined with self-assessment. So really being able to understand, assess what's going on inside, get accurate information from ourselves, our self-esteem, which is how do we feel about ourselves in this moment, and our self-confidence, our ability to be able to, that we believe to be able to get things done that we want to get done. So here are some practical tools, tips, strategies for self-awareness. One, you can really work by starting to take responsibility for your thoughts, wants, and actions, right? Access and use of your feelings in an appropriate manner in any context to facilitate achieve determined goals. So, self awareness is really the first step to being able to say, okay, what do I want in this moment? What do I need? What is my need that I'm trying to communicate and get met in this moment? And how can I access and use my feelings and the energy that comes from my emotions and my feelings and the information that comes from my emotions and feelings to be able to get the goal accomplished, to get my need met, to get the connection and support that I need in this moment? It also comes to knowing your values. What are the things that are important to you in this world? Honoring yourself and trusting your intuition and experiences, working to improve your vocabulary of descriptions of your emotions. Very frequently, I hear oftentimes when you're checking in with people, how are you doing? How are you feel? I'm overwhelmed. And I'm like, okay, overwhelmed is a feeling, absolutely. But one of the things that I often remind folks and I work with them is typically overwhelm is just like the tip of the iceberg. Under overwhelm is typically a lot of other feelings, and that can be anxiety, hopelessness, frustration, irritability, sadness, helplessness. Like there's so much that can be there. So really working with yourself to start to understand the definitions of certain emotions. And then when we have these complex emotions, really being able to parse out what are the components that build up into us feeling these big feelings. So, next, be assertive, practice saying no. This is one that I think is really challenging for a lot of Black femmes who have maybe tried this before and have been shut down or constantly felt like their needs aren't getting met. So it's kind of like, why bother? But being assertive and practicing saying no is a critical part of us being able to give ourselves pause so we can really check in with ourselves and understand what is it that we need and that we want in this moment. I'm also a really, 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 really big proponent of saying what you need to say. Say what's on your chest. Say it with love, kindness, and respect, or not, depending on the situation. But holding those things and waiting for the perfect moment, or holding on to those things and waiting until you feel like the other person is going to get it or they'll just figure it out isn't helpful. So a part of self-awareness is being able to identify and then start to be like, okay, I gotta get this out. I need to move this energy to be able to lighten my load. And then be flexible. So practice transforming your emotions from one state to another. And we're going to talk about a couple of practical tools to be able to do that in our next section. Any questions about self-awareness? All right. Self-regulation. So you'll see that I use self-management and self-regulation pretty interchangeably. Self-regulation includes being able to have self-control again. So really being able to control oneself, understand what's going on, being able to modulate or being able to move ourselves from one emotional state to another. Then we have adaptability, which is really being able to pivot at any moment given the current circumstances and situations, being as less phased as possible. I'm not gonna say not being unfazed at all because life be throwing sucker punches sometimes. So it's kind of hard to not be phased at all. But we can try to be as unfazed as much as we can. Then we have resilience, which is our ability to bounce back, which is similar to adaptability, but not exactly the same. So when we talk about resilience, we're talking about, okay, adaptability is in that moment, really being able to shift and change to adapt and get what we need. And resilience is like, okay, after this thing has happened, what do I need to do to get myself back to a space of my baseline? What can I do essentially to recover so that way I can be back in a space where I can operate and show up in this world as optimally as I can. And then consciousness. So consciousness in terms of self-regulation is having that, just that kind of like that internal awareness so that way you can have that regulation. And again, constantly being in that relationship with yourself to get that information. It's a part of our consciousness. So, with self regulation, really working on our ability to monitor the intensity of our responses in a manner that's appropriate for the context. So, do we need to kind of turn up the volume if we are typically a person who shuts down and becomes insular, or are we a person who needs to turn down the volume because we ready to go off on everybody? What do we actually need to do in that moment to best get our needs met? And I like to remind folks that there is no one right answer for any person or any situation. It's all really going to depend on you, where you're at, how you're feeling, and all these other tools and factors that are happening. Next, we want to work on really taking responsibility for one's own actions and one's emotional states. So, really being like, okay, I am responsible for tending to my inner world. I am responsible for tending to the care of my heart. I am responsible for assessing and working with my emotions. And really taking ownership of that and working with ourselves to be able to nurture that. Next, knowing that you can cope with unexpected chaos, right? So, again, this is our adaptability and our resilience and building up those tools to help ourselves kind of bounce back when obstacles come into our lives. Then, where we talk about can we soothe oneself when one's life circumstances are difficult, and then regulating your emotions. So, again, we'll be talking about some practical tools in a little bit that'll help build our regulatory capacity. And when we talk about regulating our emotions, we're really just saying, okay, I'm having this emotion, and what can I do to, again, get myself back to baseline? What do I need right now? How can I give it to myself? And being able to meet ourselves there. Next, we have social awareness, which talks about empathy, so our ability to recognize the humanity in another person and relate to that. Organizational awareness, so organizational, situational, place, person, time, connection awareness. And then service orientation, really how we show up for other people, how we show up in this world, how do we show up for the things that we love and that we care about, and for the people that we love and that we care about. So being able to recognize the emotions in others and the fact that they are driven by their emotions and internal world. There's this quote in that's often attributed to Don Miguel Ruiz in one of his books, and really like, don't take anything personally. Take nothing personally. And this is a really great reminder that the same way in which we exist in relationship with our internal world, whether we're conscious of it or not, other people are also interacting with their internal world, whether conscious of it or not. And sometimes it's really easy to feel like things are happening to you or people are doing things to you, which in some cases and in situations they definitely are. But sometimes it's like, oh, like you're actually responding to something that has nothing to do with me. Unfortunately, I'm on the receiving end of that, but that's you and yours, and I don't have to take that on to try and fix or try and mitigate at this point in time. Don't believe everything that you hear or everything that people say about you or say to you. This is really important, especially because we are prone to believe the worst and give that more weight in our worlds than the positive. So, really being able to help mitigate the challenges or maybe some of the criticisms that we've taken in from other folks, and starting to downplay those down and believe in the positive things that folks are saying. And lastly, connect with other positive people or social groups to help build your skills. So finding like-minded community, finding people that believe in the same things that you believe in, finding people that love, care, and support you, that show up for you, 10 toes down, ride or dies. That is a part of having social awareness and building our community. And lastly, relationship management. So helping to develop others and develop your relationship with others. Conflict management, which again, might be another workshop we might see. but really being able to regulate ourselves in that moment, understand that we had conflict or a rupture or a misunderstanding, and then what do we do from there? And then collaboration, which is just being able to work together with other people, right? So that really comes with forming boundaries around your emotions and learning to recognize your emotions as separate from other folks' emotions. Really being able to say, like, this is where I stop and this is where you start. And I don't have to take on where you're at or how you're feeling in order to have empathy for where you're at and how you're feeling. Recognize that other people's emotions do not have to be your emotions. Same thing, different way. And you have the option to not react to every emotion sent your way. So again, this comes back to self-regulation and self-management. Sometimes we're in relationships with some really tough people that we love and care about. And unfortunately, they may hurl things at you or project things onto you. And it's very easy for us, again, to kind of take those things on and take those things in as truth. And the truth of the matter is, you don't have to react. It may feel like sometimes you are ready to and you want to, and if you do and that's your choice, that's your business. But also, you don't have to. If you know that this person knows exactly the thing to say to get under your nerves and under your skin, and they do it every time that you're around them, let this time be different. Be like, you know what? I'm not gonna give you that power over me today because I don't like that. I don't like that you doing this forces me to feel like I have to respond or have to react in this way. So that is all the information on how on your internal and your external emotions. So now we're going to talk about, well, how the hell do you identify your emotions? For folks who are beginning in this process and they're like, okay, yeah, sometimes I be feeling these things and it be feeling really intense, but I don't really be know what they are, like why I'm feeling them or what's going on with them, or like that's weird. Like it just happened. And like, for folks that any of those things resonate with, this next part is for you. The first thing that I love to tell people or encourage folks to do is to start keeping a journal or keeping a mental record of where your baseline is. So I love using a very simple energy scale from 0 to 10, 0 being I ain't got no energy, I'm numb, I am done, I am toasted, I am crispity crisp, to 10 being I got the most energy and I'm like, for some people it can be like energizer bunny, for some people it can be really ecstatic, but where is your baseline? So take a moment, and for those watching the replay, you can pause the video here, but just check in with yourself and say, okay, from 0 to 10, where is my energy at right now in this moment? And like, okay, take a beat. You got it? Good. Okay. So for you, for some people, their natural energy may reside at like a 3. Or I have some people who get really fancy and they're like, it's like a 3.75. And I'm like, okay, cool. Um, that's your business. For some folks, their natural energy is at a 7. And that's good. And that feels really good to them. The fact of the matter is the numbers in theory are arbitrary and don't necessarily have a solid anchor. But we know what it feels like when we're at a 7 versus when we're at a 4. And when we are off our base and when we're off and we don't feel like ourselves in that regard. And the thing that I find really, really important about this is knowing where your baseline is allows you to, one, identify when you are not there. And then two, it gives you a clue as to what actions can you take in this moment to get you closer to where you would like to be. So for example, my natural energy really resides at a 7, 7, 8. Typically high energy person, morning person, don't give me coffee because I will be like an Energizer bunny on crack. Okay. So I typically am a very high energy kind of person. So if I'm at a 10, because, maybe I wanted a Starbucks refresher and now I'm like bouncing off the walls, I'm like, ooh, okay, I need to do something that'll help me bring my energy down. So, what are the things that I can do that helps me calm myself, right? Versus maybe I'm having a really tough couple of days and I've been struggling mentally or emotionally, and I've been residing at like a 4. Okay, that's actually lower than typically where I would like to be. So, what can I do that'll help raise my energy up? Right. And I like to remind folks that when we use this method or when we use this framework, that the goal isn't necessarily to make the leap from 4 to 7, right? But the goal is to move in that direction. So maybe if we're feeling really low energy and we need to kind of raise our energy up, we're going to go exercise. We'll go for a walk, which is great. And maybe that walk takes us from a 4 to maybe like a 5, which is in the right direction. And know that it might take a couple of different actions or layered action to be able to get us back to where our baseline is. And I like to remind people the only way to know is by trying, and the only way to start is by beginning. So if this is a new practice to you, if you're unfamiliar, if you're like, this is kind of interesting, or I've never thought about it like this, give it a shot. Give it 2 weeks where every day you just kind of think about that for yourself. And then from there, see where your baseline is. Any thoughts or questions? I'm gonna pour myself another cup of tea.
I don't necessarily have any questions, but I really do like this, the idea of like going back to the baseline, you know, because it's so you can lose sight of it pretty quickly. I mean, well, for me anyway. So yeah, knowing what those layered like actions
Mhm.
is important because it's really easy to think like if I did it today, then it's going to be good tomorrow. And
Right.
that's not necessarily true.
Yeah.
These actions are something that need to be built on and checked in
Mhm.
with various experiences. And heck, sometimes even throughout the day, right? Moment to moment, especially if you're going through a difficult time. So I really like the fact that, like, yeah, to slow yourself down and to come back to your baseline. It's
Mhm.
another way to check in with yourself without asking without saying to yourself, like, what's wrong with me? Or like, oh, like what is going on? And constantly feeling lost. Because I think I also often hear in my area that like what is wrong with me? That's
Mhm.
a thing that I often hear all the time. And stuck in the why. When you get stuck in the why and trying to answer that, you really get stuck in the mud. But really, if you're just taking these numbers in this nice um, area to say, okay, how am I feeling? What's my baseline? And you already have a mention of what these numbers are, it does make it a little bit easier to identify quickly that something is off. And then what whether you know the emotion or not, to just do something. And
Mhm.
I think sometimes when you get stuck, you don't recognize that I can do something.
Right.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And I think that's oftentimes where folks, like we're not taught this stuff, right? We're not really taught how to navigate these things. And sometimes people, um, especially folks that may have grown up in chaotic or unpredictable emotional environments, they feel like emotions are things that kind of just happen to people, happen in the world, and like there's nothing that you can do about it. You just gotta kind of ride it out till it's done. And that is an option. I like to remind folks like that's not necessarily wrong because it is an option that is available, but there are other options that are also available that aren't just that. So the tool, what we're actually talking about is called modulation. So being able to modulate, and when we think modulate, we can think move. So how can we move our energy in the direction to get ourselves back to a space where we feel comfortable, safe, calm, at ease for ourselves? And another reason why I like the baseline is that it can feel neutral, opposed to sometimes some of the other tools that we're going to look at, which make us kind of look at emotions, which can be very charged in and of themselves. This kind of is like a really neutral way of looking at things and being like, okay, like this is where I am, this is where I want to be. Let's do that. Or like, let's do something to get there. And the two questions that I ask folks to think of is, okay, now that I have this information, so where is my energy? Where is my energy right now? Does that feel comfortable? Yes or no? If yes, great. What is something we can do to maintain it? If no, where would you like to be? And what is something that you need? And what is something that you have capacity for? And once you kind of go through that process a couple of times, you'll be able to kind of pick up on it, and you can kind of hop to those last questions of being like, okay, I'm at a 4. I want to be at a 7. What do I need? What do I have capacity for? Because you might need connection, you might need time alone, you might need a meal, you might need to go take a poop, you might need to take a day off. And it's like, okay, these are the things that you might need, but of those things, what do you have capacity for? Okay, I really need some connection right now. I have the capacity to FaceTime my friend. I have the capacity to share a meme or like ask for my friends to send me memes right now. And that's a way of being able to work with yourself to be able to get those needs met. Make sense? Cool. All right, so these are some of the next 2 slides are my tools for identifying your emotions. Obviously, we have the immaculate, wonderful, beautiful feelings wheel. There are so many different versions of this online. You can go and Google or search um, any of them, and I whatever floats your boat. One of the things that I like to encourage folks to do is either work from the inside out or work from the outside in. And know that you can have feelings that exist, or you can have things that you feel on this wheel at different times. So you can feel anxious but excited. You can feel tired but curious. Like just because you're having one dominant emotion doesn't mean that the other emotions don't exist or stop existing. We also can look at the emotional intensity scales. So sometimes we need more language. Sometimes we can say like, I'm feeling happy, or like the feeling is happy, but maybe it's not as bright as happy, or maybe it's like a little bit less than happy. So having emotional intensity scales allows us the ability to look at the full spectrum of what it looks like to exist in that emotion. So, for example, in happy, you can see that it's pleased, satisfied, contented, silly, lighthearted, cheerful, excited, enthusiastic, ecstatic. Each of those are under the umbrella of being happy, but if you are satisfied, if you look at somebody who is satisfied and somebody who is ecstatic, they look like two very like different people who are expressing different emotions. So learning how your range of emotional intensity looks like for you. And I have another resource on the next slide that I think is also really great. This over here is a free app. I know it's on Apple devices. I'm not 100% sure if it's on Android devices, but it might be. Definitely look it up. But it's called the How We Feel app. It's a free app. It is great. I love free. It's for me. But it is a app that can help you start to do this tracking and have this behavior. And so it first thing that pops up when you have a check-in is you'll get this screen that says tap the color that best describes how you feel. And it runs on this praxis of low energy to high energy and pleasant feeling to unpleasant feeling. And within that, you're able to kind of tap these, and it expands out into this grid of different emotions from there. This allows you to pick up to 2 emotions. You can also put in there where you are, who's with you, what are you doing. If you're a person who collects fitness data, it'll track how many hours of sleep did you get. If you're a menstruating person, are you menstruating? And then you can put in a photo, a voice note, or text to kind of give more context to that. The thing that I really like about this is you can, at minimum, you can just put the emotions in there, and at maximum, you can fill the whole thing out. But it does a really, really cool breakdown each week. And it says, okay, over the course of this last week, you typically were feeling really blue in the evening, or you're feeling really anxious in the mornings. And then it says like, what are some tools or what are some things that you can do that can support you in anticipating that this is coming up. So this will really, really help with your emotional awareness and being able to work with identifying your emotions. And the nice part about this when it comes to the emotions that you pick is they'll give you slight definitions and they'll show you the differences again between a satisfied and a content, for example. Another two tools that I really like, I like using the emotion sensation wheel. When we talk about top down and bottom up approach, which is going to come next, sometimes it's hard for us to come to an emotion, but we can tap into the body and identify the sensations or the things that we're feeling in our body. And that can give us clues to what we're feeling, right? So sometimes if we are feeling anxious, we might feel really fidgety, we might feel like we're kind of jittery. If we are feeling confused, we might feel like really like speechless. If we're feeling very satisfied, we might feel very soft or calm. So tapping into the feelings in the body and letting those help us identify our emotions and start to bridge that mind body connection is a great, great, great way that we can continue to build information and get information about our internal world. And then lastly, this is another grid of emotions that talks about from 0 to 10 where each of these emotions are for us, or it's the same concept as the 0 to 10 scale of our emotions, but looking at the various emotional categories. So from 0 to 10, how glad are you today? From 0 to 10, how mad are you today? From 0 to 10, how sad are you, scared are you, or shamed are today? And what this is really, really helpful for is for acknowledging, like, okay, just because I'm feeling really sad today doesn't mean that I feel no happiness. Maybe I'm feeling super anxious today, but I'm also pretty content. Or maybe I'm feeling, self-conscious today and I'm feeling really angry. So it allows us to start understanding and recognizing that each of these core emotions can exist along their own spectrum as well. Any questions about any of the tools? All right. Part 4. So now that we've talked about how do you identify your emotions, now let's talk about what does it actually mean to process your emotions. So when we talk about processing our emotions, there are two typical ways that we're going to think about it. When we are processing our emotions, the goal of processing our emotions is to bring our mind and our body into one. So this is what we would typically call our mind-body connection. So the mind body connection has two directions because there's 2 points. So you have the top down approach, which is using the mind to connect to and regulate the body, and the bottom up approach, which is using the body to connect to and regulate the mind. Okay. So with the top down approach, you really want to start thinking about, okay, how what what is my response to what's happening here? What are the cues that I'm picking up in this situation, in this environment, with this person that makes me feel safe or unsafe? Okay. What are the things that I'm noticing? What are the things that I'm seeing? How does that feel in my body? Where is that showing up for me? And then again, using the mind to help regulate the body, asking myself, am I actually in danger in this moment or am I safe? Right. And using that information and being like, okay, this is uncomfortable. This may not feel good, but I'm safe and I'm gonna be okay. And then using that in combination with some of the somatic practices to be able to calm our bodies down. Right. Then we have the bottom up approach. So these use the body to connect to and regulate the mind, right? So this goes back to the emotion sensation wheel that we just saw and saying, okay, maybe my heart is racing. Maybe I'm feeling really, really anxious. And I'm like, okay, what do I do? So using the body to help regulate the mind. So let's say we're feeling anxious and our body is feeling really, really tense and jittery. And in our mind, when we get anxious, maybe we have racing thoughts. And it's like, okay, how can I use my body to connect to my mind and say, we're okay, we're safe. And this is really where our somatic practices come into play. This can look like breathing. This can look like exercise or movement. This can look like yoga. This can look like meditation, but it's anything using the body to help the body calm down so the brain can unlock and get out of this fight or flight, am I safe or am I not safe mode. So these are the two ways in which we process our emotions, and we can think about how do we process the emotions as they come. And I encourage folks to use and try both. Typically, we have one way of processing that feels more connected to or dominant than the other. But it's important that we have tools in both sets of these toolboxes because it allows us the space to be able to say, okay, if for whatever reason I don't have access to this one thing, what can I do to help myself feel better? So, for example, um, let's say I'm in the middle of like a really, really big meeting and something happens and I feel triggered. I'm not necessarily gonna go and do downward dog for 5 minutes in the middle of this meeting. Like, what can I do? Okay, I can breathe, or maybe I have a mantra that I can repeat to myself. Internally that'll help me calm down. Maybe I can just start tapping on my chest or rocking side to side. Things that we can do both internally and externally to help ourselves regulate and get back to a space in which we can get closer to our baseline. I think it's really important to remember that emotions are energy in motion. Um, Emotions will move with us, through us, for us, and that it's okay to look at our emotions as information. Sometimes these things come up for us to understand or connect to a deeper piece or part of ourselves and our experience. And we can often think about our emotions being like really hella inconvenient because sometimes you be like, I'm just trying to have a good day. Like, why am I feeling vulnerable right now? Like, what is going on? But really, they're just energetic teachers and being like, hey, this emotion is coming up because there's something that's going on that hasn't been acknowledged, hasn't been met, or is being missed. So let's call attention to it. And our attention to it is by giving it this emotional charge. So that way we are able to get that need met, get whatever we need to get from that moment, whether that's internal processing, connection, etc. Any questions about how to process your emotion? All right. Finally, how to feel your emotions. Now we're kind of like we talked about how do we identify them. We've talked about how do we process them. Now it's kind of like, okay, how do you actually feel your emotions? Like what do you do in your body to like feel them? One, I want to start with talking about sitting with our emotions. For a lot of us, we haven't taken the time to develop our relationship with our emotions. So it's challenging, or we can kind of get into the space of being like, I don't want to do it, or I don't know what to do, or this is feels really weird. And I don't like it's typically very normal for folks to be like shrinking up and being like, I'm good. So I want to talk about what are some of the things that's important for us to know when we are sitting with our emotions and the discomfort that may come with that. I like to remind folks first and foremost that emotions can't hurt you. Um, Feeling the emotion, even though the emotion sometimes can feel very big and can feel very consuming, the emotion in and of itself cannot hurt you. And I like to remind folks that just because you are feeling any particular emotion, this does not have to interrupt, stop, or change how you move and navigate through the world. And I understand as a person who also personally navigates this, that is very much so easier said than done. But when we think about it, in an objective way, if you've ever had a vacation that you were looking forward to and you were really excited about, and you were like, ooh, 10 more days, 5 more days, 6 more days, I can't wait to go on this vacation, just feeling like this overwhelming excitement build as we continue to get closer to vacation. That's great, right? And we don't let the excitement of the vacation coming up stop us from going to work, being able to feed ourselves, taking care of our duties and things that we need to, with for our families or at home. But sometimes when we talk about fear specifically, or when we talk about anxiety, it's really, really easy to be like, I feel paralyzed. I feel like I can't do anything. And I try and remind folks that fear and anxiety are emotions. They are feelings. And that feeling the feeling while it is uncomfortable can't actually cause you any harm, right? And in the same way that we wouldn't let our excitement about vacation stop us from doing what we want to do, we don't have to let the anxiety or the fear stop us from doing what we want to or have to do. It is possible to feel the fear, to feel the anxiety, and still take action. Those things don't have to clash with each other or be mutually exclusive. You can still feel the fear and do it anyways. You can still feel the anxiety and still do it anyways. And oftentimes, the stories in which we are telling ourselves about the result of the fear and the anxiety very, very, very rarely come true, or I'll say they rarely come true to the depth or the extreme that we may believe it to be. And I think that's really important to acknowledge and be like, anxiety is a lie. And the truth ain't in them. It's like going to see a movie that you're all this hype was about, and then you get to the end of the movie and you're like, that was whack. Like, that's what anxiety typically feels like. It's going through all this anticipation, this building, and then it falls flat because typically the things that we are most afraid of, or the things that we believe mostly to happen, don't really happen. Second, I like to remind folks that the discomfort of sitting with our emotions is temporary. It can feel very, very intense. I understand the intensity of feeling grief, feeling depression, feeling anxiety, and how physically uncomfortable that can be within our bodies. And I like to remind folks that that discomfort is transitory. It will continue to shift and move as we work with the emotions. It's very rare that emotions get stuck in people for forever. And for folks that does happen to, they're typically chemical imbalances or extreme life circumstances or trauma. But for most folks, the discomfort that comes will continue to shift and move as you work with the emotions and the energy and the things that they're bringing up. And that pairs really well with our last one, that no emotional state lasts for forever. And I think it's really important that we have to remind ourselves, like, we've survived 100% of our worst days that we've had in this life so far. Every bad day that you had, every bad season of life that you had, every bad month that you had, every bad year, some folks that you had, it didn't last for forever. Eventually it ended and life kept it pushing. And I think it's really important to remind ourselves of that, because sometimes when we're in the thick of it, in the middle of it, it very much so can feel like this sadness is going to last for forever. This anxiety is going to be present for forever. I'm never going to know life without this. And the truth of the matter is that nothing lasts for forever. It may be there longer. And I think sometimes we feel like it's forever because no one can point to a very specific date and be like, okay, cool. On July 12th, this is going to be done. That's not typically how our emotions work. So it's really, really challenging in the moment because it feels like it's forever. But even just reminding yourself of that, like, this feeling won't last for forever. This won't be with me for forever. This is not the truth of who I am. And affirming that to yourself can be really, really helpful when dealing with some of those intense and big feelings. Any thoughts on some of these quips, I guess you could call them?
I think it goes back to the idea that you have more control than you think you have. And even though you don't need to like control in order to jump to a solution, because obviously sometimes feeling a painful emotion is painful, it's that you are still strong enough to feel the feeling and have an innate wisdom to know what to do next. It's
Mhm.
like that self energy that you can kind of relax into. So I love how you highlighted that because emotions are temporary. And if you can like sit back and think of a time where, yeah, you were excited to go on that vacation, and the next thing you know, you get to the vacation, and then it's time to go. It's time to go home. So that excitement then turns to like vacation blues. So yeah, you don't have to be a slave to your emotions. And I love that the thing that you mentioned at the last slide too, that it's energy teachers. Your emotions are energy teachers, and I love that because you can still take in the information, what works, and then like you said, leave what isn't working, or leave what is causing you some distress. And how you leave that is by the skills that you use. So yeah, I really enjoy that. That really sit well with me.
Yay, good, good, good. I feel like there's people I feel like if there's like one slide that I want people to like see and take from this, like this one, like I promise you, I promise you,
Yeah.
promise you, I promise you, like it is possible to regain autonomy and control over your emotions. Like you don't have to feel moved through the wind with them, even though sometimes life again can be dragging you by the neck sometimes or by the big toe. But it is possible for you to like live life and not feel feel like you have more control, right? And feel
Hmm.
you have more tools and you have more ability to be able to navigate through that.
Definitely.
Word. So lastly, before we get up on out of here tonight, I wanted to talk about some somatic tools for processing our emotions. This comes from, I don't think I have the box in here, but the Hack Your Nervous System deck by a wonderful practitioner, a licensed marriage and family therapist whose name is escaping me right now, but I will make sure to um, include that in the notes. So we have 3 sets of different tools. We have things that are low stress, then we have some tools for when we're feeling medium stress, and then we have some tools when we're feeling acute stress. And acute stress doesn't mean like it's it's cute. It means that it's coming up like in the moment, like this is a lot. I just may have been triggered, and like, what do I do in that moment? So low stress, we have earthing, breath of the heart, joint release, and twist it out. These are tools that we can use for maintenance. So these are things that we can do all the time that can help us just maintain a regular level of feeling calm and feeling good. Is this the right one? All right, this is one. So the breath of your heart, let's start with the going order. Earthing. So earthing, I really love is like connecting to nature. So earthing is walking barefoot outdoors or in the grass or laying on the earth. So grass, dirt, or sand. Something that folks can do is imagine that there are roots coming out of their feet and going into the ground to help them feel grounded. They can send anything that doesn't feel good, that doesn't feel resonant to Mother Earth. Earth can take it and compost it and turn the stuff that we don't want or that feel bad to us into some of the most beautiful, amazing landscapes, plants, all that jazz. Um, so that's earthing. The breath of the heart is placing your hand over your heart space and inviting all of your attention to gently rest there. Imagine as you begin to breathe that you are breathing in and out of your heart. Inhale and the breath flows into your heart, and you exhale and the breath flows out of your heart. You can repeat that for up to 1 to 5 minutes. And then after that, bring to mind a time in which you felt deep peace, love, or gratitude, and connect to any of those emotions or feelings if they are present now. Next, we have the joint release, which I think is really important. Movement, movement, movement. Move your body. Modulation is movement. So movement of our bodies is a wonderful way for us to be able to work with ourselves in that way. So joint release is, again, starting from the top of the head and working our way all the way down to the bottom of our feet and moving through gentle movements. And these aren't anything crazy. These are neck rolls, shoulder rolls, bending and straightening your elbows, rotating your wrists, extending your fingers, making fists, circles with your torso, hip circles, bending and straightening your knees, rotating your ankles, expanding and contracting your toes. So any and all of the major joints that we have, really just moving them. We are stiff as human beings, and it is important that we continue to move our bodies. And doing this joint release will help release tension from spaces and places in our bodies. A quick way that we can do this is inhaling our shoulders up to our ears and then exhaling and dropping our shoulders down. Very frequently, we are people whose shoulders kind of just typically creep up throughout the day. So having that space to relax our shoulders back and down can be helpful. Lastly, twisting it out. So you can sit or lie, and really that's just doing a torso twist side to side and really being able to wring out our bodies, which can help with emotional release. Any questions about those? And I will include the full instructions or the full pictures for each of these in the email that goes out after. So for medium stress, we have self-compassion. Self-compassion improves your ability to manage stress and promote relaxation. It's really about offering ourselves kindness that we typically are very quick to offer other folks, but not necessarily ourselves. The self-hold sequence, which I find to be very calming and grounding, which is putting a hand on the base of your skull, a hand on your forehead, and breathing here 5 to 10 times, then taking your hand, excuse me, and moving it to your heart, breathing here 5 to 10 times, taking this hand, moving it down to your belly, breathing here 5 to 10 times, and taking the hand on your heart and putting it on your lower back and breathing here 5 to 10 times. For folks that are missing physical touch, that's a wonderful one to have. Also with the self-hug can be really, really helpful in being able to calm the body. Laughing therapy, laugh. Laughter is one of the best medicines and best free medicine that we can give ourselves. My favorite thing to watch and laugh at lately is like the Steve Harvey Family Feud videos with like the silly answers. Hilarious. Absolutely hilarious. That is my jam. And lastly, alternate nostril breathing, which is inhaling and exhaling and switching between the breath. I will also include a video of how to do that. Lastly, acute stress, which is again not cute, but for when we're feeling super stressed out in any given moment. One of the things we can do is shake it out. I love to do a shakedown, which is not like give me money, but an actual shake out down. And think about like the hokey pokey. You do your left arm for 10 seconds, you do your right arm for 10 seconds, you do your left leg for 10 seconds, you do your right leg for 10 seconds, and then you come back and you do your left arm for 9 seconds, and you do your right arm for 9 seconds, and your right leg, your left leg, and you keep going until you get to 1. And then when you get to 1, you kind of just do a full body shake. Shaking is a very natural way to release like traumatic energy from the body. It's something like if you have a dog, that's something that dogs very naturally do. Like when something happens that startles them, or when something happens that is like, even when like they are coming out of like rest and coming into kind of like just awareness, like they'll shake their bodies to kind of wake it up and shake things out. The I am calm is really using your eye movement to help tap into our nervous system and regulation. So this is akin to what is EMDR, which is eye movement desensitization EMD, rapidization. Something like that. Essentially, is moving your eyes back and forth while processing traumatic stories. And the science is moving the eyes back and forth helps us to process the trauma without by bypassing our amygdala, which is a part of our fight or flight. So this is a part of that. And so keeping your head still, you'll shift your gaze as far left to as far right as you can, 15 to 20 times. Um, Allowing any yawning, sighing, deep breathing as like an indicator that your nervous system has been reset. Then we have tapping, which is tapping on the major meridian points in the body, which are just places in our body where we have bundles of nerves that can help relax and release stress. And then lastly, the humming bee breath, which is humming like we're a little bumblebee. So closed mouth humming. And that again can help with vagal tone, which will help regulate our nervous system. I will give a better breakdown of each of these in our email that goes out to folks, and I will write out the steps or maybe make a separate tool that goes over each of those so that way folks have access to that. But these are some somatic tools for helping us process our emotions. And when we're feeling things, again, you can use each of these to be like, okay, do I need to bring my energy up and maybe kind of shake it out? Or do I need to bring my energy down and do some deep breathing? What do I need in this moment? And how can I get myself closer back to my baseline? Thoughts, comments, questions? Cool. Ben. Wrap up, put it together. Okay. So what's super duper important and the biggest takeaways from today are I want folks to know that you have the ability to have autonomy and control over your emotions. I want you to know that you can have a relationship with your internal world to the point in which it is a relationship and you are both giving and receiving information from each other. I want folks to know that it's okay to feel your feelings and your feelings don't have to run you, and that we can have autonomy and we can build up our tools and our awareness of ourselves to really be able to work with our emotions. And then from there, be able to connect and relate to others in our worlds that we love and care about. I love this shit. I think it's so important. And I think it's so important that people are able to have relationships with their internal worlds and be able to exist in the fullness of their authenticity and have that integrated knowing of themselves. So thank you all for being here. I am so happy and so excited that we got to spend some time together. For the folks catching the replay, thank you for letting your energy and the energy of this offering exist in the ether. And I appreciate you. I will see you soon. Love, light. I hope you are well. Take care. And you got this. You got it. Okay? You got this.